one thing to say to you guys, and that is, Happy Halloween! In today's video, I'll be talking about magic. Or more specifically, if and how you can portray a character with magic in fantasy reenactment. Today's video is a bit different to usual, but you've probably worked that out already. I'm not your usual host. My name is Mildew Mudlin, because, quite frankly, Iodo doesn't know the first thing about magic, so she isn't qualified to talk to you about it. And this is being broadcast from the land of Discworld to your planet, Earth. Earth is a bit of an unusual name for a planet, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't something as unusual as a round planet be called something more interesting? And I still don't really understand how a round planet can work anyway. I mean, don't people fall off the bottom? And wouldn't the elephants, squash people's houses? Oops, I'm sorry, I seem to be very distracted today. I think it's this hat. It focuses thoughts upwards away from the brain. Let's go back to talking about magic. Yes, of course you can. You can do whatever you want. But if you want your impression to be realistic, you will have to think about your character carefully so that it works both in the fantasy world that your character's backstory is set in and in the real world. Of course, there are some characters that it would be very difficult to portray with a fantasy reenactment impression. A good example of this is Ian from the film Onward, because by the end of the movie, he's using magic for pretty much everything, even making a van fly. And it would be a bit dull to have a fantasy reenactment impression where you had to keep making excuses like, because I don't feel like doing magic today. At this point, the solution is to portray a character who has magic but isn't always very magical. You're probably thinking, how is that even possible? Let me tell you. Realistically, there's two ways to do this. The first is to portray a character whom everyone in their world knows that they can do extremely powerful magic. Someone who people are naturally wary of because they know that they can do magic. Someone who, in their character backstory, everyone's heard stories about, and everyone believes those stories to be true, with absolutely no questions asked. Even though most of the people in question probably have never seen this person do magic. Gandalf the Grey is a perfect example of this. He's a wizard. Everyone knows he's a wizard, and wizards can do magic. Of course they can. Nobody ever asks questions about this in the film. Nobody ever asks questions about this at any point as far as I'm aware. Whereas, if you read the Hobbit book, there isn't really that many examples of actual magic from Gandalf the Grey. But that doesn't make his character any less magical. But most of the time, he just gets by being clever and thinking about what he's doing. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm not in any way suggesting that Gandalf can't do extremely powerful magic, because we all know that he can. But what I am suggesting is that in ordinary life for him, when there isn't some Dark Lord trying to take over the world, he doesn't do that much magic, really. And at this point I'm going to get a little bit sidetracked here, so you'll have to accept that. I was rereading some of the bits of The Hobbit the other day, and I did actually think, well, some of Gandalf's magic isn't actually necessarily all that magical. And that might be a bit of a harsh thing to say, because we know that some of it is, but I'll just show you this one example. One of the spells that Gandalf does in the Goblin Caves in the chapter Overhill and Underhill in The Hobbit. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue glowing smoke, right up to the roof. That scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins. So the first thing to note is, yes, the description is vague, so it probably can be interpreted in just about any way that the reader thought when they read it. So a lot of you might have read this in the past and got completely different ideas of what actually happened in those moments than I did. But this is the way that I read it when I was a child. Obviously, to make all of the Goblin Cave's fires and lights go out, of course he would have needed magic. But white sparks showering from the rooftop? Well, take a look at this. This is magnesium powder, a very common ingredient in fireworks. Safety. Well, that seems quite a lot like piercing white sparks to me, and the effect it has makes total sense. I mean, goblins certainly have no love for light, and when you think about it a little bit deeper, Gandalf most definitely has magnesium, because he makes fireworks, and magnesium is a common ingredient in fireworks. I'm not entirely suggesting that he just lit a pile of magnesium and scattered it like I did in that little clip, but let's say he had a handful of magnesium powder out of a belt pouch and he held it out in front of him and he blew it into the air. And then at that exact moment he lit the cloud with a spark from magic in his staff. Well, that would certainly do the effect that's described in the book, wouldn't it? I guess that would be a perfect example of magic being science that we don't understand yet. Because if you showed fireworks to medieval people, they would definitely think that it was magic. So we've looked at the method of portraying a character who, although being mysterious and magical, doesn't use magic in their everyday life just because of the way that they are and relies mainly on stories and the fact that everybody knows that they have magic and, well, being very, very clever. But if that method is not for you, there is a second way to portray a magical character in fantasy reenactment. And that is simply to have an in-world backstory reason that means that your character won't be using magic all the time, every day. This character, who I'm dressed as right now, Mildred Mudlin, a travelling research witch from Discworld, from the Ramtop Mountains. She's a perfect example of this kind of character. And the reason for this is, Discworld world lore states that witches don't like to do magic all the time on a day-to-day basis for mundane tasks, for fear of going cackling. So instead of using magic, they prefer to use more subtle things, like intelligence, knowledge, and a thing called headology. So very much like Gandalf, they can totally do powerful magic if they want to and if they need to. But they have a legitimate in-world reason not to do this all the time and to never make a habit of it. So there you have it, 2 ways that you can portray a magical character in fantasy reenactment, and you can still have a reasonably realistic real-world impression. So now let's talk about ways that you can make your realistic real-world impression just that little bit better. Now obviously, aside from the things that we talk about in context with all other fantasy reenactment character impressions, like having a realistic garb that would work in the setting for the character that you're portraying. I've got basically winter clothing because my character's from the Ramtop Mountains, which is quite cold most of the year, and the garb was designed for Halloween, which is in winter, so I don't really have summer equivalents of this clothing. There's one other thing that you can do to help your impression be a little bit more realistic, and that is, don't have props in your character garb which don't work in the real world. Now, it is of course entirely optional. If you want to do that, you can, and honestly it doesn't matter that much, but I find that there's nothing that breaks the immersion more than having an item with your character garb that doesn't work. A perfect example of this for this character would be I could carry around a broomstick. Now, you've seen my sticks video, and I'm pretty sure that I mentioned in that you could use a broomstick to put up a shelter tarp. Now, yeah, you can. A broomstick is a fairly good walking staff as well, so it would be useful, but in world it's intended to fly. In our world, reality check here, it wouldn't. So the fact that it didn't would mean that you were carrying around something that doesn't work for its intended purpose. So Honestly, I find it's just better to write into your character backstory a reason why your character doesn't use that item, which in my case is perfectly easy. Although it would make sense for a travelling research witch to carry a broomstick because it's useful for travelling, I can just say that Mildred Muddlin doesn't because she's scared of heights and prefers to hitch rides on stagecoaches between towns. And that's a pretty easy character backstory fix for this, and it gets around the problem that I would be carrying around something that doesn't work. So if I wanted my character to have a walking staff to aid in travelling on foot, then that would be perfectly acceptable as well. And I think that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, I'll see you in the next video.